A boy from a poor neighborhood helped an old woman with a sofa, expecting nothing in return. The next day, his neighbors were shocked to see a luxury car stop at his door. Eli shifted the basket of fruits from one arm to the other, the weight digging into his tired shoulder. The sun was low, but still hot, casting long shadows across the narrow streets of Brookhaven. He moved quickly, zigzagging through the crowd, careful not to bump into anyone. His mother would be waiting for him at home, her face probably drawn with worry. The rent was late again, and it showed in her tired eyes, the way her voice caught when she tried to sound cheerful. He had to hurry. He was almost at the corner where the streets opened to a few small houses when he saw the old woman. She was struggling, her face red, bent over a big, faded blue couch that looked too heavy for her to handle. She pulled one end, and it got stuck in the doorframe, making her mutter curses under her breath. Eli stopped, setting his basket down for a second, and watched. The old woman wasn't going to make it. She was panting, beads of sweat rolling down from her grey hairline. Eli hesitated for just a moment. Then, without really thinking about it, he moved closer. "Hey, need a hand?" Eli asked. The woman looked up, startled at first, then squinted at him. "You sure, kid?" she panted. Eli nodded. "Yeah, no problem. Where do you need it?" "Inside. The living room's right through here," the woman said, straightening up with a groan. She motioned toward the open door. Eli nodded again, grabbed one end of the sofa, and heaved. It was heavy, but he held on, his fingers digging into the coarse fabric. They maneuvered the sofa, Eli stepping backward into the hallway, careful not to bang it against the doorframe. "You live alone?" Eli asked, trying to make conversation. The silence in the house seemed so empty, almost hollow. "Yeah, my son visits sometimes," the woman said, short on breath. "But, well, you know, people get busy." Eli knew people got busy with their own lives, with their own problems. He and his mom had enough to deal with without expecting anyone else to swoop in and help. They finally got the couch into the small living room, and Eli set it down, trying not to let it drop. The woman leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. She gave Eli a tired but grateful smile. "You didn't have to do this, you know. Not a lot of kids would stop to help." Eli shrugged, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "It's nothing. I was just passing by." "Well, thank you, really. These days, I'm not as strong as I used to be." She straightened up and fumbled in her pocket, pulling out a crumpled $10 bill and trying to hand it to Eli. "Take this. It's not much, but—" Eli shook his head, stepping back. "Nah, I can't. I didn't do it for money." The old woman frowned, insisting, but Eli held up his hands. "Really, it's fine. I gotta go. My mom's waiting for me." The woman finally lowered her hand and nodded. "All right then. But thank you, son. I appreciate it." Eli picked up his fruit basket again and walked out the door, giving a little wave without looking back. He felt the tension leave his shoulders, his mind already moving back to the bills that needed paying, the work still to do. The sun was almost gone by the time he made it home. His mom was in the tiny kitchen, her hands busy over a pile of fabric. She looked up when Eli entered, her eyes softening for a second before they narrowed, landing on the empty basket. "You sold everything?" she asked, hopeful. "Yeah, everything," Eli said, dropping the basket by the counter and grabbing a glass of water. She sighed. "Good. At least we'll have something for the groceries tomorrow." Her voice wavered just a little, and she looked at the pile of bills on the table. "But that rent." Eli knew she was worried, knew it was his job to stay positive. "We'll figure it out, Mom," he said, keeping his voice light. "Something will come up." She gave him a small, tired smile. "I know, baby. I hope you're right." Eli stayed quiet, listening to the clock ticking above the stove, the sound of the neighborhood slowly quieting down. He could hear kids still playing outside, a dog barking somewhere far off. The world was still moving, even when it felt like theirs was barely holding on. Later that night, Eli did his homework under the dim light of the only working lamp in the house. His mother was sewing in the corner, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. The air was heavy, a weight that pressed on Eli's chest. He thought about the old woman, about the heavy sofa and her tired face, about how even strangers needed help sometimes. He didn't know it then, but the old woman would be important. She would come back into Eli's life sooner than he expected, and everything would change. The next morning, Eli woke up before the sun rose, the first hint of light barely creeping through the thin curtains in his room. He could hear his mom already in the kitchen, moving around, her footsteps soft against the creaky floor. He got up, dressed quickly, and joined her. She was making tea, her face already lined with worry, eyes distant. "Morning, Mom," Eli said, trying to keep his voice cheerful. "Morning, baby." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She handed him a piece of bread, and they sat down in the small, cramped kitchen. The stack of bills was still there, sitting on the table between them like a silent accusation. Eli looked at them, and then at his mom. He could see how tired she was, her shoulders slumped, the lines around her eyes deeper than they should have been. He hated seeing her like that. It made something heavy settle in his chest. "We're going to be okay," Eli said, trying to sound convincing. "I'll figure something out." His mom looked at him, her eyes softening, but there was a sadness there too. "I know you will, Eli, but I just don't know how we're going to make it this month." She sighed, rubbing her eyes. "That man came by again yesterday, the landlord. He said we've got until the end of the week. If we can't pay." Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. "I don't even know where we'd go." Eli clenched his jaw, a mix of anger and fear running through him. He didn't know what to say. He just nodded, trying to keep calm. "I'll figure something out," he repeated. His mom reached across the table and touched his hand. "You're a good boy, Eli. I don't want you worrying about this. It's not your responsibility." But it was. He knew it was, whether she wanted to admit it or not. He was 13, but he felt older most days, like he had to be. They ate in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Eli knew he had to get to the market soon. It was Friday, one of the busier days, and they couldn't afford to lose any sales. He finished his bread, gave his mom a quick hug, and grabbed the fruit basket from the counter. The market was already bustling when Eli arrived, vendors setting up their stalls, calling out to each other, laughing. Eli moved through the crowd, finding their usual spot. He started setting up, arranging the fruits as neatly as he could, trying to catch the eye of passers-by. The hours passed slowly, the sun climbing higher, the heat pressing down on him. People came and went, some buying a few things, others just looking and moving on. Eli tried to stay focused, tried to sell as much as he could, but he kept thinking about his mom, about the landlord's ultimatum. Around noon, Eli took a break. He leaned against the wall behind their stall, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He watched people move around the market, a blur of faces and voices. He felt small, like the world was too big, the problems too many. A group of boys his age walked by, laughing loudly, pushing each other. They looked carefree, like they didn't have a worry in the world. Eli envied them. By the end of the day, Eli had sold most of the fruits, but not enough. Not nearly enough. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, he packed up, his body aching, his feet sore. When he got home, his mom was sitting at the table, staring at the bills. She looked up when Eli walked in, her face softening but still sad. "How'd it go?" she asked. Eli set the basket down and handed her the money. She counted it, her face falling slightly. She forced a smile, looking up at him. "Well, we did our best." "Yeah," Eli said, trying to keep the disappointment out of his voice. "We'll keep trying." That night, as Eli lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, he thought about the old woman and the heavy couch, about how he'd helped her without thinking, just because it was the right thing to do. He wondered if maybe somewhere out there, someone would help them too, if maybe they just had to hold on a little longer. The next afternoon, as Eli turned the corner onto his street, he saw it. A sleek black luxury car was parked in front of their small house. His stomach dropped. He watched as a well-dressed woman stepped out of the car. She was tall and poised, her grey hair tied back in a neat bun. Her eyes searched the street before they landed on Eli. She smiled, a kind, gentle smile, and started walking toward him. "You must be Eli," she said, her voice warm. Eli nodded cautiously, tightening his grip on the basket. "Who's asking?" The woman chuckled softly. "I'm Ruth Whitman. You helped me with that sofa the other day. I wanted to thank you properly." Eli blinked, taken aback. "Oh, it was nothing, really." "It wasn't nothing," she said firmly. "Not many would have stopped to help an old woman like me. You're a good boy, Eli, and I'd like to help you in return." Eli stared at her, unsure of what to say. He thought about his mom, about the rent, about the landlord's ultimatum, but something about this felt strange, like it was too good to be true. "We're fine," he said quickly. "We don't need anything." Mrs. Whitman smiled, her eyes kind but determined. "I'm not offering charity, Eli. I'm offering an opportunity. My son and I, we want to help you and your family get back on your feet. No strings attached." Eli hesitated, his mind racing. Finally, he nodded. "I'll think about it." Mrs. Whitman handed him a small card. "Take your time, Eli, and thank you again for everything." With that, she turned and walked back to the car, leaving Eli standing there, the card heavy in his hand. When Eli walked inside and told his mom what had happened, her eyes filled with tears. "Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling, "maybe this is the help we've been waiting for." For the first time in a long time, Eli allowed himself to believe that things might finally change.